for anyone who is unable to attend. You'll be able to get a recording of this. So welcome to Senior Parent College Night. I'm Ashley Smith. I am one of the school counselors who works with students with last names A through GO.
I'm Jamie Toto. I am one of the school counselors and I work with seniors with the last names GR to O.
And I'm Greg Coppolino and I have last names P to Z.
So as you see here, we have our contact information, both our emails and our extensions. We know this process can be a equally stressful process for parents as well as the students. So feel free to reach out to us at any point. Sometimes it's nice for parents to just kind of check in, see where their students at in the process, how things are going, provide us feedback. So again, our information is below with any questions or concerns.
Hi again, and so thanks for coming. And so we're going to start off by talking about some of the post-secondary options we discuss with our students. So a lot of our students are looking at four-year colleges, typically like a four-year bachelor's degree, 120 credit program. We also talk a lot about two-year programs, which are typically associate's degrees at community colleges. And just to spend a moment on the community colleges, one area we talk a lot about is mass transfer through QCC, Quinsigamond Community College, where students go, they get an associate's degree. After 2 years, they gain admittance to state schools. All the credits transfer to the state school and the guaranteed admission. There's some really neat programs there. They not only have transfer agreements with state schools, but they have agreements with private schools like WPI for computer science and engineering. So it's a really cool approach to take if your student wants to, and you maybe want to save a few dollars and do all your general education requirements at a community college. We also talk about vocational technical schools for students that might not be on the four-year college track. Schools like New England Tech that offer the building trades like plumbing and heating and electrical. And they also offer typically certificate programs, which are like fast track programs to get into the workforce in like licensed practical nursing, cybersecurity, things like that. We talk about the military with some students. Obviously, if your son or daughter talks to a recruiter, they'll have a friend for life. They will call a lot and try to recruit your child, but some students do want to learn more about the military. We'll talk about those options and the approach they can take to enlist. And then we have conversations about gap year opportunities too. Some students might want to do a postgraduate year at a private school or independent school like Worcester Academy. They might want to take part in AmeriCorps or Job Corps for a year and volunteer like for a nonprofit or work at a school, things like that. So those are some of the conversations we're having right now with our students. There's different types of admissions. Here's the ones that we typically talk about with our students: rolling admission, regular admission, early action, and early decision. So there's a variety of deadlines depending upon the admission type your child chooses. And you don't have to choose just one. Like you might have 6 schools and you're choosing maybe rolling admission for one school or early action for another and regular decision for another. And we have conversations about what makes sense for our students. But rolling admission, that's an open time frame where students can submit applications as they get sent to the schools. The admission counselor at the school will review the application. They make an admissions decision fairly quickly once the application is received. Often the the enrollment period or the admission, rolling admission period will start in like July, August, and then close up in like January, February, March timeframe. So a student can submit their application anytime and then have a decision fairly quickly. Regular decision, that's when most students apply by the regular decision deadline. That's when most applications are going to the schools. We're talking about deadlines typically in early January. Most regular decision deadlines will be the 1st of January, middle of January. Then early action deadlines, which early action typically will start November 1st, although we have some schools that start earlier than that. And so early action, students can apply to more than one school early action. There's a variety of reasons why a student may choose or not choose early action. You know, my theory is if a student has a strong application they're ready, their application, they can't improve on it, their essay is really good, they're a high quality candidate for a college, early action, you know, could be a good option for our students. It's non-binding, and so it means that they can apply to these schools. If they get admitted, they don't have to attend the school. They can apply early action to any school they want to. Early decision, that's another option. Early decision is a binding agreement though between the student and the college. So if they get admitted, they have to attend the school. The downside being they won't have an opportunity to compare financial aid awards with other schools. So early decision is a pretty limited thing that we see. Last year, I think I had 2 students apply early decision. A lot of schools don't even offer early decision, like a UMass Amherst, they don't offer that opportunity, but more highly competitive schools do offer early decision. One thing you know, we've done since last spring and into this year is help students build college lists. And it's an ongoing process. Colleges are on the list, they're off the list, and students typically have a longer list and then they start to pare it down over time. We tell them about something called Supermatch and Naviance, which is a search tool to look for schools. They can use different criteria, whether it be a regional school, how large the school is it in an urban environment, a rural environment. They can choose a major that they want to major in, and then it kind of narrows down their choices of schools. So Supermatch is a good option to use to search schools. Big Future is another tool on on College Board that it's a search tool for colleges, and we point our students toward that too. But when we talk to students about a list, we want to include things like a reach school, sometimes called a dream school, match school, or safety schools. I'll talk about that in a minute. But if a student has a list of schools, our hope is that these schools are all schools that the parent and student would be happy about if they got into it, that the student would be happy to attend, and that they've visited the school and feel comfortable attending that school. That's sort of the criteria for when we make a list with a student. So for there's different selectivity levels, reach, match, and safety. You know, a reach school is going to be a school that any school with an admission rate less than 20%, even for the top students in any school, is going to be a reach school. If a student's academic credentials are below the average GPA for that school, that tends to be a reach for students. So if the average GPA for an incoming student is a 3.3 and a student has a 3.0 GPA, we would consider that a reach. If the student's credentials match the average GPA, or they fall in what they call the middle 50%, which is the it means it's the middle 50% is half of the prior year's freshman class, what the range of GPA scores were. So if the middle 50% for a school was a GPA range of 3.3 to 3.6, it means that half of the prior class had GPAs in that range. If a student has a lower GPA than that middle range, that would become a reach school for the student. If it's in that middle range, it becomes a match school if the admission rates are between like 30 and 60%. So we use the middle 50% to kind of help us figure out, is it a match? And we also use admission rates for the school. So if the admission rates are higher from 30 to 60%, and it's a good match for GPA and SAT scores, we would call that a match for the student. For safety schools, that's when the credentials for the student are above the average GPA scores for that school. And we want students to have safety schools on their list. They hopefully include some that are financial safety schools. So for you and the student, that there's a school or schools out there that if they get into, that they're reasonably affordable and that the student can attend, and it's not going to create a financial hardship. And
So just to include a few things, we were actually just talking about this today. Something to also keep in mind when discussing selectivity levels with your student is a student may be a match for a particular college or even a safety, but if they're applying to a specialized program within that school, then that can sometimes sort of switch and sort of up the ante to a degree. So for example, we have a number of students who are interested in nursing programs. If they were to apply just to a particular college, they might be more of a match or a safety, but because they're applying to such a specialized program with a high competitive rate, that can sometimes switch and make it a little bit more of a reach to some degree, that because a number of students are going to be applying that may have similar GPAs, similar college applications. So we'd like to kind of keep that in mind with students, is that yes, if you were to apply to this one college just for a general program, it would be a match or safety, but because you're looking at a particular business school, engineering program, nursing, that can sometimes switch in terms of where that selectivity level goes. And reach sometimes isn't just academic. It can also oftentimes be financial. So unless a student gets a particular package, we might have a student who's like, my reach school is Boston College. They might have and check all the boxes in terms of not just the academics, but even more than that. And yes, it does have a high acceptance, a competitive admittance rate, but beyond that, a more expensive school for a student, unless they're getting the right package, and depending on where financial aid kind of stacks, can change in terms of whether or not a student is able to get in or not.
So I think the approach that we use when we develop a list is to have like 1 to 3 reach schools, 3 to 4 match, and 2 to 3 safety. But it's really up to the student and the family. No one's forced to apply to reach schools. If you're comfortable and the student's comfortable just applying to match and safety schools, that's perfectly fine. So that's something that you might consider. Some students do want to reach for like a program that they maybe always wanted to try to get into, but that's not required. Certainly, it's really a decision that you and your children can make together.
Okay, so we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about the actual application process. So just for you guys to know, in case your student did not tell you, we met with all seniors in 3 separate groups this week for about an hour, going through all of this with them, walking them through physically on their iPads and their Chromebooks, how to kind of access a lot of these things. In addition, because this slide can be very overwhelming to listen to and to see, we meet individually with all seniors. We typically reach out to you afterwards to kind of give you an update of how the meeting went, things that they need to do. They usually leave that meeting with a to-do list. So it's not just this, we do connect with them a lot. So the application process. Obviously, like Mr. Capolino mentioned, finalizing the list of colleges. This might be kind of fluid for a while this year. That's okay. I've had students who have had their set list of colleges for a few months, and then come January, they add another school, they take one off, completely fine. Just important to at least get that list going to make sure we have something for them to apply to. Really important, obviously, with that is making sure the application due date for every college is something that your student knows about. We've talked to them and we showed them how to make sure the due date is visible on their Naviance portal. That helps us to know when their application due date is so that we can make sure we send all of the materials by the date that's needed. So Naviance is a big platform that the seniors use. This is, again, mostly for requesting letters of recommendation, having us send transcripts. Common App is the main way most students are going to actually apply. That is the physical, actual application. So they're going to continue to use those two platforms. We showed them both of those. We had them log in so they can show you that too. Requesting letters of recommendation through Naviance. We went through this with every single senior this week. If for some reason they had trouble with that or they were not able to do that, again, we meet with them one-on-one, so we'll make sure that that is done. The college essay, many students have completed this already from their junior class, their English class. That was an assignment for most junior English classes, so that should be pretty set for them. If they have not worked on that yet or started that yet, we will touch base with them around kind of how to do that. So filling out applications, and again, we'll go into this in more depth in a little bit. The Common App is going to be, again, the main way students apply. The Common App is one online application. It is connected with over 900 colleges. One application, it gets sent to all the colleges that the student picks. There are some colleges in Massachusetts and kind of across that do not use the Common App. Two specifically I can think of in Massachusetts, I believe Salem State is one of them, and then Endicott College. They do not use the Common App. That means that if a student is planning to apply to one of those schools, they also have to fill out that school specific application on the school's website. Again, we'll meet with them. We'll make sure they know where to apply and how to kind of access all of that. I will skip the FERPA waiver piece for right now. Take SAT and or ACT. Most students just take the SAT, which is completely fine. That's the more popular test in this part of the US. Similar to the past 2 years, most colleges have a test optional policy. However, as Ms. Smith mentioned, there can be instances where a specific major still requires you to send them. So again, nursing is one of those where, you know, the college might have a test optional policy, but the nursing major in that college requires you to send the SAT. Honestly, I think that is the main major that does that. I actually have not come across many others that do. So if your student is applying for nursing, specifically, we can kind of connect with them about how to make sure whether or not their college they're applying to is requiring the SAT scores. For everyone else, we will sit down with you and we will kind of look at the SAT scores, look at the colleges your student is applying to, and decide whether or not that makes sense for, you know, your student to send the SAT scores. Sometimes students don't do great on the SAT. That is fine. The great thing about now, at least, is that it's not required by a lot of schools. So we will work with your student on that. Meet with admissions counselors at top choice schools. We encourage you guys to take your student to go on tours, to do info sessions at colleges. It makes a really, really big difference for a student to physically see a college in person, get to hear from people, kind of see what the environment is. And then we will get to financial aid in a little bit. You will have to apply for something called an FSA ID. This is basically like an online signature that you use for your FAFSA. The FAFSA is the federal application for kind of student aid. That's the main one. It opens on October 1st. So October 1st, you can go onto FAFSA.gov and fill out the FAFSA. We, as counselors, are not able to really assist with the FAFSA. We'll give you resources at the end of this. We are experts in the college application process, but the financial piece, that's super important. We have really good resources to provide to you, but we want to make sure that is done well and correct. For most students and families I've talked to, the FAFSA takes them about 45 minutes to fill out. It requires your tax returns from the previous year, and it's actually pretty straightforward. It'll say, you know, enter line 31 on your tax 1040 onto this website. So it really walks you through it, and it's not as scary and awful as people think it is. So it opens October 1st. It's not first come, first serve. So don't freak out if October 1st comes around and you haven't done it yet. I personally kind of suggest that families complete the FAFSA by January 1st. Every college actually has a deadline for the FAFSA. None of those deadlines are before January 1st. So if you want to just be safe, if you get it done by January 1st, then you will be fine for all the colleges your student is applying to. Scholarships, there is not much to be done at this exact moment for scholarships. So local scholarships are provided and talked about more in the springtime. So those are ones that are local scholarships for kind of the community. Those come out at usually mid-March, the end of March. If students are looking for scholarships right now, it's more of just kind of doing the Google searching scholarships.com. There's a lot of different websites that you can look into to find just scholarships. It can go down like a deep dive because there's a lot out there. But that's kind of where the scholarships are right now until the spring, when the more local ones for Uxbridge residents and people that live in this area come out. So how does everything get there? We talked about this with the students this week too. So what is sent by the student? Obviously the application, they hit the submit button and they submit that. We are happy to look over the Common App for a student before they submit it. That is completely fine. Any additional essays that a college requires, application fees, any additional material requested by a college. So we reiterated this to students this week also. We don't get the requests all the time that a college is asking. So a college might reach out to a student after they apply and say, hey, we actually are looking for your second quarter grades or your first quarter grades. Can you please send them? Don't assume that we know, because we actually do not get that request from colleges. So your student would have to reach out to us to let us know, and then we can absolutely submit that. SAT scores, it is not that we don't want to send their SAT scores, but we don't have access. College Board is pretty secure and strict with that. We have no access to send anyone's SAT scores. We actually don't even know your students' SAT scores unless they choose to share them with us. So those scores have to be sent by your student on the College Board website. Super easy to do. We are happy to sit down with your student. If they bring in a credit card, I think it's $16 to send it per college. I've walked through it with students before if they get stuck, but it's very straightforward. And then, like I mentioned, the FAFSA and the CSS profile. CSS profile is only required for private colleges, so you will see that when your student does apply. Then what is sent by us? We send the transcript with all the grades. We send a lot of kind of inner forms, so secondary school report, a school profile. We write your student a counselor recommendation, and we send the teacher recommendations as well. And if there are fee waivers, or if you believe your family might qualify for a fee waiver, you can reach out to us as well, and we would send those. Student athlete responsibilities, just quickly, if a student is planning to play Division I or Division II sports in college, They will need to register with the NCAA Eligibility Center. They also will have an area on the Common App and on Naviance where we can actually send your materials to the NCAA. So if your child is planning to play Division I or Division II, just make sure they check in with us so we can make sure that that is all set. So test scores, I talked about this a little bit already. Many colleges have gone SAT optional again. Have your student go through their list of schools to see the most updated SAT information. It's as easy as, you know, typing in Clemson University, SAT admissions, and it should pop right up and say whether or not they are test optional or not. Again, important to look at the program specifically that your student is planning to apply to there in case they require them, usually engineering or nursing, or any kind of pre-med. Subject tests, they do not exist anymore. It's also advisable to send more than one test score due to potential super scoring. So what that means is if your student took the SAT in June, and then they took it again in August, and their highest score in math was the June test date, but their highest score in the reading writing was the August test date, they would send both of those test date scores. And what the SAT and College Board does, and the colleges, they take the highest score from each of the tests, and that makes your student's actual SAT score. So it's called super scoring. No subject tests, so we're good. Fee waivers, they're generally available for students who have already received an SAT fee waiver previously. If they've received one from a college, feel free to reach out to college admissions. If you have a student who's applying to a lot of colleges, a lot of times if you just reach out to admissions and say, hi, like, you know, my child is really interested in applying, is there any way we can get a fee waiver? It works a lot of times. If you have a student who is applying to a lot of schools, 15 schools, something crazy like that, it adds up really quickly. Fee waivers also, if you have a student who is on free or reduced lunch. And then if you're not sure, contact your school counselor and we can kind of figure that out for you. All right, so financial aid again. So like I mentioned before a little bit, the FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. That is that main application for financial aid. That's the one, it opens up October 1st. It is required everywhere if you want any sort of financial aid. So every college, public, private, doesn't matter. Like I mentioned too, colleges have different deadlines for FAFSA. If you want to just kind of play it safe, like I said, January 1st is a good date to aim for. It requires an FSA ID from students and parents. So that FSA ID, it can be a little tricky. So if you are planning to fill out the FAFSA, you're going to sit down, you're going to pull it up on the computer. It's going to have you make an FSA ID. It will then, it takes usually 24 to 48 hours for them to generate an FSA ID for you, and they will email it to you. So if you're planning on a Thursday night to fill out the FAFSA and you're getting ready, you're not going to be able to do it. You're going to have to make that FSA ID first and wait until they email you your FSA ID information. CSS profile. Again, this is required in addition to the FAFSA at some private colleges. You can find that right on the college's website. This is available online usually in September. Again, kind of depending on the colleges that your student is applying to. A great resource for financial aid, because I know this part is overwhelming and confusing, is the Massachusetts Educational Financing Authority. They go by MIFA. They have endless amounts of live Zooms, webinars. They're available if you need to call them and ask them a question about the FAFSA or filling it out. They will meet with you one-on-one. They are fantastic. And on this slide, so these are just some of the upcoming events that they have. They are all, I think, virtual. They are doing them every single week. So these are just the next two that we've seen. So Financial Aid 101 is on the 28th. There's another Financial Aid 101 that's on Thursday, October 6th. So they do that often, and that's really helpful if you need any kind of transcription or translation. Those services are offered too.
So before I jump into this piece about students with learning disabilities, definitely click on that MIFA link as well, because in addition to the Financial Aid 101, they also have additional webinars that cover different topics. There's some stuff about like just paying for college in general, gearing up for it. It even goes as far as start addressing that college piece in middle school. So if you have a younger child as well. So again, MIFA is a great resource. And then just about the FSA ID, if you have a child who has already gone to college, or you yourself has gone to college where you've applied for an FSA ID already, you will use that same FSA ID for yourself. So you do not have to reapply for another one. So I just wanted to make that just so, you know, where if you've already gone through this process to some degree, it might just be your son or daughter applying for an FSA ID. So now it's students with learning disabilities. So the FERPA. So public schools are not allowed to release any educational records without parental consent. And basically, you guys have access to anything with your child's name on it. And when we have, so before we get into the students with learning disabilities, we discussed with the students, because there is a FERPA authorization that they have to either waive or not waive in the college application process. And the best way that we explain that is they have access to anything that has their name on it. With that said, schools want to know that the documents that they're receiving, their transcript, their letters of recommendation are all genuine and authentic. So sometimes if a student chooses not to waive their right to view their information, you know, it's not, it doesn't necessarily present with a problem, so to speak, but it's kind of begs the question of, okay, did the student have anything to do with their letter of recommendation and so on and so forth. So we kind of go over the sort of pros and cons to that piece of it. But on the other end, in terms of students with learning disabilities, this means if you have a child who is on an education plan, a 504 or an IEP, we can't just send that information to their college. The other piece of it is, that information does not necessarily translate to college. So if you do want your child's plan to go with you to college, getting a copy of their 504 and or their IEP would be the best way for you to then take that information and choose to disclose that information to that school. If you wanted us to do it, we would need written consent. But most often, what will happen is families will take their child's plan and then they will report and check in with the student services at each college. In general, the student services at colleges are pretty extensive for all students, not just students on plans. With that said, certain accommodations or modifications that your child may have received at the high school level do not necessarily translate at the college level. So you would want to take your child's plan, go to the school with the student services to sort of see what is that school able to do for your child. So just in terms of where to sort of access this information. So if you also want to click into Naviance, you are free to do so. So under departments, you can click into under the high school for more information. And you can, there is an option where you can sign up as a parent. Oftentimes we have parents who just utilize their child's Naviance. That's up to you and your child. But again, we are happy to sort of walk you through that process as well, and to provide you sort of insight into where your child is in terms of Naviance, what's done or not done. Letters of recommendation. So one of the things we had the students do in the spring of their junior year was to think of 2 teachers that they would want to write them letters of recommendation. And what they were sort of tasked with before going away for the summer was to talk to those teachers in person and see if they would be able to and willing to write a letter of recommendation. For those teachers who said yes, One of the steps that we did today, this week, and if some students had already done it on their own, was to formally then request those letters on Naviance. Once it's requested on Naviance by your child, there's nothing else that they need to do. The biggest and most important thing is they've made the request, and as long as their deadline dates are updated and correct in Naviance, that's it. We will take it from there. The teacher will receive on their Naviance dash, these are the students who have requested me. This is the deadline I have to have an letter of recommendation uploaded by. And then once they upload their recommendation, we then are able to send it on their behalf. Okay. So when we are talking to students right now, our biggest thing that we stress to them is their accurate deadlines in Naviance, especially for students, like say a student might input regular decision, and then they kind of feel like they're in a good spot. They change their mind and they're like, actually, I'm going to apply November 15th. If it's November 13th and they make that decision, it doesn't necessarily mean that their teacher is going to have a recommendation ready in time. So that's why it's really important to kind of keep those lines of communication open. We do write a letter of recommendation for all of our students who are applying to colleges. So that is something we do for everyone, but we do ask that students complete a senior information sheet. This is available on their Google Classroom. There's also a parent brag sheet that we would love for you guys as the parents to take a moment to fill out. And you can do one of two things. If you're comfortable with filling that out where your child has access to it and they can upload it to Google Classroom, great. If it's something that you'd rather sort of go on a little bragging spree and you want to send it to us directly, that is totally fine. Oftentimes, how students fill out the senior information sheet and then how their parents describe them in their parent brag sheet is just such a beautiful combination of the student. And you'd be surprised how much we're able to take from both the information sheet and the parent brag sheet and weave that in to better personalize their recommendation. So the Common Application, it's used by over 900 colleges and universities. We explain to the students that if they go to search a school and it's not popping up, then that is most likely a school that does not utilize Common App. However, we've already found that as we've been meeting with students, there's a very few schools that they are applying to that are not utilizing the Common App. We do also stress to them that the Common App it's easy in terms that it's very biographical. It's just tedious because there's a lot of information that's covered because it is accepted by so many institutions. As they start to add their colleges, they'll see that some of their colleges are going to have additional questions. So we make sure that we sit down with your child, and this is something that you may want to do as well, and kind of click through their colleges on the Common App and see what those questions are, because some of them could result in a supplemental essay. Things that you guys can do with your child throughout this process. If you haven't done so already, you can visit colleges together. For some, especially for schools that are out of state, that might be a little bit more difficult. So there's virtual tours that you can participate in. Finding out the college's actual cost. This is sometimes a hard conversation, but it's a necessary conversation because it's really important that if a student is applying to a school, that they understand the possibility of whether or not they could attend that school if they were to get in. So again, kind of having that conversation about, colleges, the cost of that, what that looks like. Is there an expectation that your child will be paying for some of college? Will they be paying for their student loans? Those are helpful conversations because we've had students who, they know that they're going to have to be responsible for their student loans. And that has resulted in them being a little bit more mindful about which colleges that they're selecting. Finalizing your seniors' college list together. We would love for this to be a list that everyone is in agreement on. I think that sometimes, there might be a few schools that, you may not necessarily want your child to apply to a school in California, but they're like, no, I'm doing it. So again, finalizing the list together or having those conversations about what that final list looks like. Creating a calendar of the application deadlines and any other important dates with your senior. Naviance does do this to some degree, on its own as students add these schools to their Naviance list because they can set the deadline. But a deadline for the application versus the deadline, say, for a specialized program could be different, and that's important to know. If it is a school that will require SATs be sent, students are going to want to send that 2 to 4 weeks beforehand. College Board will try and tempt you with a good offer of spending $30 to rush ship their scores. It's not worth it. We kind of go with the baseline of plan on 2 to 4 weeks before the deadline you're sending your scores if you are sending them. And then look over your child's application as a proofreader. Once they're in the mode, they kind of get going. They're typing away. They somehow forget to capitalize. And they forget punctuation in this process. So definitely it is worthwhile to sit down. We also do this with them and offer that to them. We do meet with the students one-on-one for that initial, let's kind of see where you are at. And then we continue those check-ins until the student has completely applied to college. So sometimes it might just be a student being like, hey, can I come in, you check over my Common App, and then I'll submit it. That's something you can do as well. Working together to complete the FAFSA and or the CSS profile if needed. Also encouraging your child to participate in college admission interviews. I use interviews lightly because it's not actually an interview. It's more of a conversation. But if there's a school, there's kind of two ways to sort of look at it. If there's a school that your child would love to go to, and maybe they're like just at what they're looking for, or maybe it's just one of their top choice schools, having that admissions interview is helpful because it allows that school to sort of see a personality, meet a person beyond the application. It's a great way for your child to kind of get to know the school and for the school to get to know your child. Again, it's not always the admission counselor that would be necessarily reading the application. Sometimes it's alumni reps who live in the area, but it's a very helpful and informative aspect of the college application process. And then once they are sent, there's a small window where everyone is in relief. And then it sets in that they are waiting for either acceptances or they're receiving rejections or wait lists. As that information starts to come in and those acceptances start to come in, reviewing those acceptance packages with your child is super important, because to go over if there's any scholarship package that school is giving, and then being able to compare it to any financial aid offers together, mapping out of the packages that your child may receive, what would have to be paid back, what would not have to be paid back. The other piece I'd like to add in terms of supporting your senior, again, as Jamie had mentioned, was with scholarships. Local scholarships will get mentioned not until March, but we've already had a slew of seniors come in. What scholarships can I apply to? What scholarships can I apply to? That's awesome that they are so proactive. The one thing that I stress to students is that there are sort of scam search engines that will require you to put in personal information, credit card information, and they're going to provide you with all these scholarship opportunities. That is fake. That is a scam. Any and all scholarships that are available are free for the public to access and to apply for. There's literally a scholarship for anything, for everything, you name it. So it sort of becomes how much legwork are you willing to do and for what? So oftentimes when it comes to scholarships, it could be resubmitting letters of recommendation that were already submitted to colleges and then filling out an application, not a ton of legwork. Sometimes it's writing an essay that's not too much of an undertaking. But sometimes it can be a lot more extensive than that. And then sort of balancing out, is it worth it for what the potential award is? Because any scholarship that is awarded to your child will have to be factored in, regardless. Like once you get your financial aid and you are made aware of what you qualify for, they will then ask you of any scholarships that your child has been awarded, because that will be deducted. So that becomes a bigger conversation. And but again, it's just kind of, we say to students, if you're going to write like a 5-page essay for $50 or $100, like that may not be worth it to you. But if it's something for like $500 or $1,000, that may be worth it to you. So at this time, we're going to stop the recording. We're going to open it up to any questions. You can either unmute yourself, you can throw a question in the chat. It's whichever you prefer.